watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game, and you are watching Public Affairs. And we're going to do lots of public policy and politics this evening because we're taping this show on May 6th, and you will be seeing it rolling up in the suburbs in a week. You may see it within a day or two, and you can always find us on youtube.com/publicaffairs.tv. And most importantly, this time you'll be able to find State Representative Daniel Biss, who's been making quite a name for himself. I mean, look, the guy got an undergraduate degree from Harvard in mathematics, PhD from MIT in mathematics, finished the program in 3.5 years. I mean, I started a program at the University of Chicago in economics and PhD program, and I was still working on it. I mean, many, many years, folks, and he did in 3.5 years. You're a smart guy.
Thank you.
You plead guilty.
I'm actually not on the jury for that one.
All right. And your wife is getting her PhD at Northwestern.
In history, that's right.
In history. She's passed her prelims. She's passed her coursework.
Yep.
She started her dissertation.
Yeah, she needs to now go spend some time in Romania doing research, and it's hard to find a big block of time to do that with small kids and a husband in the legislature, but she'll get there.
So more about you as we get into the show, but as I understand it now, each day starts, they start with what's called, I would call it the Illinois Legislator's Prayer. Yes, prayer in the State House. Can they have that? Do they start with a prayer?
Every day.
And it goes something like this: day by day, for things I pray, to see thee more clearly, to love thee more dearly, to follow thee more nearly, and to handle government employee pensions more fairly.
That's almost exactly what the prayer is. That's
And
right.
have you, where have you heard those words before? I want to see how well educated you really are.
In Godspell.
Hey, man, that is so good that you got that. What was the year Godspell came out?
1971, I believe.
You cheated. Somehow he saw my notes.
As if by magic. They're
This
well
is a guy
printed.
who
It's a
reads
seriously
well.
large font.
All right.
It's helpful to the rest of us on the show.
But seriously, this is what they're doing. They being the state legislature in session, trying to, by May 31st, by the time it wraps up, or may wrap up, the State House, the State Senate, trying to figure out how you can take these state employee pensions, reform them, and make them more fair. Would you agree with me on that?
Fair, affordable, manageable, predictable.
Would you agree they're not fair now? The payout's too large. There are too many problems. If you don't do something to, in some way, reduce the cost of those pensions, state employee pensions, the state really can't go on. Would that be fair?
The mathematics is very clear on that. I don't
And
think,
you would be the guy, PhD in mathematics. So when you say the mathematics is very clear, you would be the guy who knows.
But
Right?
I want to be clear on one thing, Jeff. I don't think fair or not fair is the point. There are some really grotesque and offensive abuses, and those are obviously not fair.
Like Mayor Daley, would you say what he got, $180,000 a year by this little twist and turn?
I don't think that's what the pension system was designed for, and there's plenty
No,
of
but
other...
would you say that was unfair, Mayor Daley?
Yeah,
I mean,
I
he's
would
the
say-
leader, sort of major leader in your party,
I would say that's unfair.
mayor for 22 years, and he did a bad thing, right?
He did what the system allowed, and the system has plenty of loopholes in it that are not.
But he shouldn't be doing that. He's, for God's sakes, he was the mayor of the city of Chicago. He said to the firefighters, he said to the police, you guys need to do all these things to adjust your pensions and otherwise, deal with difficult times. And he walked away, and he did what he could do to make sure he got almost $200,000 a year for the rest of his life. I mean, seriously, you're a Democrat, but what do you say about that?
I don't know what the fact that I'm a Democrat has to do with anything.
Well, because if somebody's a
But can
Republican,
we-
they have to defend Republicans. Somebody's a Democrat, they have to defend.
I don't have to do anything, but Jeff, this is a major distraction. It's easy to get offended at the big numbers.
What is a major distraction?
Your line of questioning, with all respect.
About Daley's distraction.
Yeah.
Okay, so getting back to
No,
major
if
pension
you
issues.
just,
Yeah,
like,
okay.
I have this whole sentence worked out here. Here's how it's going to go. Watch. There's a million really offensive examples, and frankly, Daley is far from the worst. And there's plenty of Democrats and plenty of Republicans, and lots more are not partisan at all. They're just people who are near the top of the bureaucracy who are able to game the system. We can be offended by that stuff, and we should. But that's not the core of the problem. The core of the problem is that the state is well over $80 billion in debt to its pension systems. And that's not mostly about $180,000 payouts to mayors or payouts to CPS CEOs and so forth. That's mostly about a pension system that for the course of literally a whole bunch of decades wasn't funded appropriately. And so now we've got this giant debt and we can't afford to pay it down. If you look at what it would cost to pay down that debt on the schedule that we're supposed to pay it down between now and 2045, it would just eat away at the rest of government's ability to do anything. And so we've got to
It would
make
crowd
major
out,
changes.
that's the phrase, it would crowd
That's
out
the phrase
all the
they use.
important
It would crowd
spending.
out everything else.
Education,
Other
human
education
services.
spending, human services, Medicaid, public safety, environmental
So
regulation.
you can't allow that to happen as a state
I
legislator.
completely agree. I completely agree.
And
we
wait,
all should fix the
Who agrees
abuses.
with you on that? Does Speaker Mike Madigan agree with you on that?
Certainly.
Does Senate President John Cullerton agree with you on that?
I think so.
And Senate Republican leader Chris Redonio agrees with you on that?
You know, I'm furthest from her.
But you would
but
guess she
my
does.
understanding is she believes that as well.
And House Republican leader Tom Cross agrees with you.
certainly.
In fact, on this show, Charles Thomas, you know him, he's the well-respected ABC 7 News political reporter. He basically said these ideas that are being put forth now and agreed to by Democrats were first put forth by Republicans. And when I said, well, the Republicans are the idea people, he thought I was trying to promote that. Republicans, I'm saying, no, it is a fact. On pension reform, the ideas that you and other Democrats are talking about first germinated came from Republicans. Would that be fair?
I don't know which ideas
Well,
you have in mind.
well, let's take
Certainly-
some.
Okay.
Decrease in the decrease in the retirement age. You have a bill that deals with that.
An
We can
increase
talk.
in the retirement age.
Excuse me, an increase in the retirement age. What is it? Is it House Bill 6149 that deals with that?
6150.
6150. Okay. So retirement age increase first put forth by Republicans. Employee contribution
When?
increase.
Which
Oh,
one?
like 2-3 years ago. They've been
'cause
talking about this.
certainly
Redonio has been talking about it for a long time, before, perhaps even before she was Senate Republican leader. House leader Tom Cross. No, this is indisputable. You're disputing that? I'm not
just
saying it
asking a
makes
question.
Okay, but would you say these ideas came from the Republicans? Doesn't make them right or wrong now,
I'm
but
not
the
a student of
Democrats
the
are not.
history. Yeah,
You're not.
No.
You don't study history of thought.
I try to study history
Okay.
of thought. I'm not, however, the student of
All
the
right,
genesis
so
of
okay,
specific.
but let me just say, forget where it came from. Retirement age needs to increase. You agree. There's sort of a conventional wisdom exclusive of the unions, and folks would want to have the folks who represent the unions on. But I think it would be fair to say that the conventional wisdom on the necessary reform of the pensions, exclusive of the unions, would be the retirement age has to increase in some way. The employee contributions have to increase for those pensions. The salary base has to decrease in some way, or at least not increase as fast as it has been through the cost of living increase. The local villages and municipalities need to pay for their own pensions, or at least more than they're currently paying for their own pensions. And this is unrelated to these pensions, or somewhat related. The retiree employee health care contributions must increase. And the state service providers, they would support this. That is, people who provide educational services, people who provide medical services, people who provide public safety, because they know if these things that I mentioned aren't done, they'll be crowded out. There's no money to pay for the doctors, for the educators, and so forth. And the state service users, the poor people who get Medicaid, know there'll be no Medicaid for them. The parents of school kids know there'll be no education increases for them. So, in a way, just tell me, did I get all of that right? Is that conventional wisdom accurate? Is there a consensus among us?
No, I don't think so. I think it'd be.
Okay.
I think we'd be way. I'm very envious of the situation wherein there were consensus on that many points.
There's not a consensus on that.
Many of those points that you listed on that piece of paper are actually very controversial and very much in dispute. And
other than the unions, tell me one of those things that are
so
controversial.
for instance, the example of local school districts, I think
That-
you meant picking up.
Right. There's a
proportion.
controversy on that. I agree. Tell me another one. Is there another one that there's a controversy on, other than the unions, other than the local cost sharing?
Well, so I
The change in the local cost allocation. Is there anything else other than the unions that people would say, Democrats or Republicans, private sector, users, stakeholders, anything else other than the local cost sharing and putting unions aside, that people would say, yeah, something has to be done on retirement age. Yeah, there have to be more employee contributions. Yeah, the benefits have to go down, whether it's COLA or otherwise. I mean, seriously, is there anybody other than the unions who are saying those things maybe don't have to be changed?
Well, I think you and I look at this issue in really, really different ways. You seem to take a really moralistic view.
No. I take a factual view, and I just want an answer from you. I just want an answer from you.
So
Factually, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Do I have the facts right?
I don't think so. But can I say something first?
Yeah. Okay.
I try to take a factual view too, and to me, the facts say this.
Okay.
We have a giant pension debt, and the scheduled payments to pay it down are not manageable. So we have to achieve substantial savings by virtue of reforms to the system. And that's what matters to me, is achieving those savings in a way that's obviously maximally fair and maximally beneficial to the taxpayer and all that other stuff. But the goal is achieving the savings needed to make the government services that we want affordable. And so then if the question is, do you do it by changing the COLA, do you do it by changing this, do you do it by changing that, I don't think there's anything close to a consensus that we have to do each of those things.
No, not each of those.
I think what's important...
But it has to be a subset of those
what's
things,
important
right?
is that we have to find savings. Now, if you go look at what the actuaries tell us really costs the biggest piece of the money, it's the retirement age and particularly the COLA. The COLA especially is just an enormous piece of the cost. And so I think most realistic attempts to save enough money out of the system involve some kind of adjustment to the COLA. I think it's very close to impossible to get around that. And I think many approaches also include changes to the retirement age. Now, if you look at the governor's proposal, he says definitely change the COLA, definitely increase the employee contribution, and then also probably do something to the retirement age, but phased in a certain way.
The governor is doing 3 of those things that I mentioned.
And others too. But
that's my point. Just narrow to what I said. The consensus then is among the governor, among the Republican leaders, among the Democratic leaders, that you can't really address this significantly unless you change the COLA, the base salary rate of increase for government employees. And you got to change the retirement age, and you got to change the employee contributions. At least those 3 things, other than the unions, there's a consensus on. Agreed?
I don't think there's a consensus that you have to do all 3. I think there's a consensus.
Really? You can fix this with doing 2 of those 3? Because you're only doing 2, and you've said in your press release, yours is not a comprehensive approach. Yours does not solve everything, and it only addresses the retirement age and COLA.
Mine is merely an addendum, but
it only addresses 2 of those 3 things. That's my point.
Yeah, that's certainly true.
So you have to do something more, is what I'm saying, and you keep resisting that phrase. Well, I'm saying you have to do something more than what you do.
I resist two aspects of your approach. Okay. One is the moralistic aspect, and one is the...
No, it's not moralistic.
And one is the prescriptive aspect.
Where is the moralism coming from?
Well, there's a lot of talk about fairness.
Fairness is moralistic?
Maybe moralistic is the wrong word.
I thought legislators use that phrase all the time. Maybe not at the University
of
Chicago.
They don't use it.
Okay.
Here's the thing.
But you're a legislator.
I try to be.
You are.
It's true.
Okay.
Here's the issue.
And you're not about fairness because you just said that's moralistic.
I think that you need to judge a prospective solution based upon the fairness to all parties involved. But I don't think you need to go into it saying, what is a fair pension system, because we've already built a pension system for better or for worse. And the question is, how do you change it to save enough money?
So tell us about your proposal.
So, and to be clear, my proposal doesn't get at the center of the issue that we're talking about so far, and it needs to be an addendum to the core proposal.
Okay.
I'm a humble freshman here, right? So I'm seeing a very, very multifaceted debate on the pension issue play out. And it's an interesting debate, and there's a lot of important ideas being discussed. And having watched it now for quite some time, I felt that there were a few additional ideas that could be supplements to the plan that winds up coming forth that'll make it more effective.
Which is yours as a supplement.
Right. Mine are supplements. Mine are. I don't have any pretenses about some freshman member of the House solving this whole thing by himself.
The governor, for instance, has a core plan, right?
Yeah.
And yours would be a supplement to the governor's plan.
Exactly.
Tell us about your. Okay. Tell us about. Would you want to start with House Bill 6150, 6149?
Well, I'll take them in that order.
6150.
Sure.
Which is called?
Which is a benefit buyout plan. Okay. And the idea is this: we are headed in a direction where there are going to be a series of mandatory benefit cuts. That's what's been discussed for the better part of a year now, and that's what the governor put out in his plan. I don't think there's any way to achieve the savings we need without that component to the plan.
Without which component?
The mandatory benefit cut component. But I also think that because there isn't consensus on sort of which and how much and where exactly, I think it would be useful to supplement the mandatory benefit changes with voluntary benefit changes as well, and that you would structure them in the following way. You would offer someone the option to cut a certain aspect of their benefit, for example, retire a certain number of years later, for example, give up a certain portion of the COLA or all of the COLA. You would have the actuaries calculate the total savings to the system, and then you would send the person a check immediately for a portion of the savings. In my bill, it's a third of the savings. And so the idea is they would be foregoing a substantial piece of their benefit eventually in exchange for an immediate.
And what does your bill say, raise the retirement age to 67?
By 7 years, so to 67.
And what is it now?
Well, it's 60, though the truth of the matter is that in many of the systems there are various types of early retirement options that go as low as 55.
So it would be gradually to raise it from as low as 55 to a minimum of 67.
It would push it back by 7 years, so full retirement at 67 with...
so push it back going from 60 to 67.
With
and you're
early...
saying, recognizing that in some systems you can have early retirement, which means now you can retire as early as 55.
And then would be 62.
And that would be 7 years more. So you'd raise
Precisely.
55 to 62 for early retirement, raise the standard from 60 to 67.
Exactly.
Your proposal, 6150.
Exactly.
That would be on the retirement side, but on the benefit side, what would you
And then
propose?
the same, they would be offered the same type of option with the COLA. Just give up the COLA. In fact, even...
Give up, meaning COLA, for those who don't know it.
The COLA, I'm sorry.
COLA, cost of living adjustment, right?
Precisely, cost of living
See, like
adjustment.
I'm imbibing here, refreshing with a COLA, I won't say which kind.
Indeed you are.
You're dealing with a different COLA. Okay, so cost of living, just give it up completely.
Right.
So if inflation goes up at 5%, it means these folks don't get any adjustment whatsoever, right? They eat it, so to speak. I mean, their real salary goes down as calculated for their pensions.
Right. So the way that almost all of the pensions in Illinois currently work is there is a 3% adjustment
automatic
every year.
No matter what the cost of living is.
So if inflation is 6%, your purchasing power still drops. If inflation is lower than 3%, as it has been recently, you actually have an
increase in your real salary in calculate. And people should know your state government employee benefits, pension benefits, are calculated based on your last year's salary, or an average of your last 4 years
of your 4 highest years.
Okay, right. And so there used to be a game here. I used to sit on the Winnetka School Board, and this is really what these folks said in Winnetka. I didn't, but they did. They said if there was a teacher coming up for retirement, let's get that salary up, because it was the average of the last 4 years. They'd get the salary up at least for the 2 years. That would raise it a lot. And they said, Jeff, don't worry about it. We don't pay for this.
Right.
I said, but somebody pays for it. Do you think that's acting responsibly? And they said, Jeff, don't worry about it. We don't pay for this.
Well, one of the
My colleagues on the Winnetka School Board took that approach, and I think that was around the state of Illinois. If you were in Naperville, they said, don't worry about it. You don't pay for it. If you were in Cary, wherever, somebody else paid for it. Right?
And Jeff,
except in the city of Chicago, because they didn't have this privilege.
That's right. And you know what, Jeff?
Didn't work out so well, did it?
It's bad for the state of Illinois. Right. But it was the rational decision for the Winnetka School Board, and that's the problem.
Not quite, but we can talk about that another day. Not for people who rushed around doing philanthropic activities on Saturday and then rushed to get grants and do Mickey Mouse things like this, which would cheat some low-income person out of funds so they could have more. No, completely irrational when you look at it that way. But we'll talk about that another day.
Okay.
Okay.
So, I think it's probably important at this point to say that the pension systems in Illinois changed enormously for new employees coming in 2011 and later, people like me. Right. So all the stuff that we're saying...
Current employees.
Correct.
Because that's where the big savings are. You've changed it for future employees, but to get the savings, but to get the big savings, you've got to do something about current employees. You're laughing.
I'm laughing just as it's really hard to finish the sentence around here.
Okay, finish it.
Thanks. People who are hired 2011 or later, new employees, have a very different set of rules. So the rules that I'm describing, the 3% COLA, the average of your 4 highest salary years, none of that applies for new employees. And so if you meet someone like me who was brought into the system 2011 or later, they might dispute these statements, and indeed those statements don't apply to new employees. But you're absolutely right. New employees aren't going to retire for 30, 40 years, and so the savings on the payout side aren't going to propagate into the system until it's from some points of view too late.
Is there something that is keeping the unions from agreeing, and pretty much the public sector unions say, we don't want to do any of this. We don't have to, right?
Well, historically, the position of the public sector unions has been that the Illinois Constitution forecloses the possibility of changes of any sort whatsoever for people who are already in the system. So say, take me. I was hired January 12th, 2011. I've been in the system, and the position that they would take is that I'm constitutionally protected going forward for all the benefits I would earn until I retire and receive until I die. That's a great position to hold, and there's logic in that position.
What position do you hold? You're a state legislator.
I'm not an attorney.
No, but you do have a vote on this, and so even though you're not an attorney, I think it's a fair question to say.
Oh, of course it's a fair question.
Do you agree with the unions of that position you just articulated, or you disagree with them?
Here's what I would say. The plain reading of the Constitution certainly backs that up. It says the contractual benefit shall not be diminished or impaired. Conventionally in life, we view a contract as a going forward thing. It says
pension benefits are enforceable contracts. Benefits shall not be diminished or impaired, as you said. Right. That is Article 13, Section 5, as amended in 1970. Right. I think that was CONCOM. Right?
Exactly. So
you're saying that's what the Constitution says, but you know, there are law firms who have looked at this. Civic Federation has looked at this, I believe, with law firms. Civic Committee of the Commercial Club of Chicago has looked at it. Yeah. And they, with those law firms and lawyers, I think, take a different view and say, this applies to the benefits that have already accrued, but for current employees looking forward to the not yet accrued benefits, doesn't apply. Right. They say it would be constitutional to do this.
Right.
So, you know, we don't have the Illinois Constitution here, but this is the U.S. Constitution, which I learned at the University of Chicago Law School. Right. Keep it in your pocket. Don't leave home without it. We should also get somebody to get me a copy of the Illinois Constitution.
It's bigger, unfortunately.
But we take those seriously. The U.S. Constitution and the Illinois Constitution. My point to you, it'd be fair.
Yeah.
Fair to say here is they're intelligent people, smart people, knowledgeable people, disagree as to whether the Constitution prohibits the kinds of changes we're talking about here.
That's certainly true, but I would go one beyond that. I've read all that stuff. Both sides have long legal documents that cite a lot of case law. Candidly, neither side is 100% airtight, if you ask me. But I would actually address the question in a different way, and that would, my way of addressing it actually will bring us to what's become sort of the governor's approach on this, which I think is actually pretty smart. Sometimes people say, you know, the Constitution is not a suicide pact, right? So let's say that the Constitution has a protection for all pensions going forward for anybody in the system. That's a reasonable position. Let's say that position. Well, the Constitution also talks about providing for the welfare of people of Illinois. The Constitution talks about the state funding education. The Constitution makes a lot of demands and a lot of requests, and it's just arithmetically not possible to fund all of them. And so the question becomes, as these pressures mount, what would it mean to treat all pensions going forward for everybody already in the system as 100% sacred? Well, it would mean we wouldn't be able to do things like fund retiree health care for those same people. We wouldn't be able to fund future raises. We eventually wouldn't be able to hire people. All of these other functions of government that the same collection of workers rely on would start to shut down. And so my point is that it's impractical, and if you want to take that logic to its conclusion, you can say, look, fine, the pensions are kept, but everybody's fired because we can't afford to do anything else.
So it's an untenable position.
It's an untenable position.
To say that the Constitution provides an ironclad guarantee that none of these adjustments that you and I are talking about would be made.
It's untenable to expect us to pay that out.
AFSCME and Henry Bair, Henry Bair said that essentially today on a news program where we tape. And we'd like Henry Bair from AFSCME to come on so we could talk about it, but he said, look, you're not asking the bondholders to give up something. Why are you asking the unions? He doesn't think anything should be given up. He doesn't think the changes you're proposing should be made, any changes. You agree? Did I get Henry Bair's position right?
Well, I didn't see this show on Fox News today.
No, but in general, you know Henry Bair's position. I mean, he's not, if you missed that show, you've seen other shows.
I've seen the Henry Bair show a number of times.
And Henry Bair says that he should make any changes. AFSCME shouldn't be asked to give up any of these these benefits, pension benefits, right?
Historically, the position of the unions has been nothing is touchable for anyone who's already in the system. I will say that in the course of the last several months, there have been a series of negotiations, and my understanding has been that the unions have been at the table and prepared to make concessions.
Your understanding is, but you can't point to anything specific or any specific
I'm not at
union
the table
member said.
myself, so I can't.
So you haven't heard, okay.
I know that there's been a working group put in
But
place.
I don't understand, because you say House Bill 6149, you say you call it new cash balances, or it's a new legislation, it would be cash balances. You said that's a defined benefit system, not a defined contribution system.
Correct.
And yet you say the benefits are tied to investment returns and how they do.
Yep.
That's what a defined contribution system is.
Right.
If it's a defined benefit system, it means they're not tied. The benefits are set out, they're defined explicitly. That is a system that hasn't worked, I think you would agree. And yet you say you have a defined benefit system, but it doesn't sound like a defined benefit system. In what sense is it defined benefits if the benefits are going to go up and down depending on the performance of the investment portfolio?
Well, the short answer is that there's a minimum benefit.
Oh.
The level of the benefit
So
is...
it's not a defined benefit, it's a defined minimum benefit, we should say.
Yes, so the phrase defined benefit is actually it's a phrase that has meaning in federal law. And so according to the IRS, this is
It's a
defined
guaranteed minimum benefit.
Correct.
Okay.
And the way it works is...
And what is the minimum benefit?
Well, so you can structure it any way you like, obviously, but the way that it works is you've got your account balance, and it goes up when the employee puts in, it goes up when the employer puts in, and it goes up with investment returns, but you guarantee a minimum floor. And different states do it a different way. Nebraska guarantees a minimum floor of 5% return on the investment.
What other states have it other than Nebraska?
Nebraska is the only state that has it in place.
Does that tell you something, though? I mean, do you think that means something, that only Nebraska has it?
Well, I think that...
I mean, we respect the Cornhusker State.
It's the only state
Matt
with
Nathan,
unicameral
who's
legislation.
directing the show, is going to be attending University of Nebraska, so we don't want to denigrate
Congratulations,
it.
Matt.
We don't, and our other fine folks on the crew here.
Right.
Jared Nathan.
Yes.
Terry Paulus, Consulting, Jay Steinberg, Roberta Markbright. We thank them all.
Right.
All right, but seriously,
No,
so...
just on this question about what does it mean that only Nebraska does it, a lot of states have major problems managing their pension system. So I don't think looking at what most states have done is a great lesson for what we ought to do.
But on the benefit buyout plan, it seems like, and we're going to continue to speak as the credits roll, and the time has gone all too fast, but I very much want to thank our guest, State Representative Daniel Biss. He has been there for now a year and a half. He is running in November for the state Senate seat currently held by Jeff Schoenberg. He currently holds the 17th District House seat. You're running in the 9th District.
That's right.
For the Senate seat. I understand you had a Republican. The Republican has dropped off. You've scared him away, Daniel. This got, you got too much education, because people think to run against you, they have to have at least a Harvard undergraduate degree, a PhD in mathematics from MIT. And how many people are there in the 9th who have that? It's
a very educated district, so I wouldn't hazard a guess, but I'm fortunate to not have an opponent, but I don't think I'm terrifying. Let's put it that way.
But the thing is, on that benefit buyout plan, are you really dealing with the present value issues? Because you say a third of the savings. Well, you're giving people current benefits now to buy them out based on savings you hope to get 20 or 30 years in the future. That was Rod Blagojevich's plan when he had this buyout plan, those pension bond sales. Let's book savings. Are you booking savings from 30 years into the future and giving something to people now? And you say, you can't have a defined contribution system because you say that would render things insolvent. This sounds like insolvency on its way. You see my point?
I do see your point. It's a great point. Just to be clear, the Rod Blagojevich plan was essentially to issue bonds and try to bet that we could do better on the market than the bond rate, which is it's a dangerous game for government to play.
But you're doing that based on savings that you anticipate getting,
and
which
so
may never
absolutely
materialize.
Right. The anticipated savings are calculated by actuaries, so it's an estimate.
But where are you going to get the money? The money doesn't occur. You have to borrow. Don't you have to borrow based on those future savings?
No. You wouldn't structure it by borrowing. What you would do is the state, for example, this year we're going to pass a budget where we put $5.7 billion into our pension fund, $5.1 billion.